Welcome to DCC. I'm Fiamma, and I'm so happy to be hosting you today. I'm tuning in from Liberty University, and why don't we do something fun? You take a picture of you watching online, whether it's of just your beautiful face, a family selfie, or even just the screen so that we know where you're tuning in from. Well, it's almost Easter, so I want to invite you to come and join us from wherever you are. We've been gathering in person, and we cannot wait for this Easter. So if you're in Nova and you can join us in person, we will be at Light Ridge High School, and we cannot wait. If not, we are still meeting online for a beautiful service, so join us, invite a friend, and they will be at 10 a.m. And as a reminder, Dallas family, God asks us to give of our financial resources as an investment to what He's doing through our church into the lives of others. Giving through our website is safe, and you can easily set it to be recurring. So thank you for giving with us. I love you. I love being a part of this community. Have a great day.
Everyone, I want to give a shout out to Jason and Katie out in Purcellville who join us online here every week. Katie gave me a gift about 6 months ago, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. Her dad wrote a poetry book, and I have to admit, I've not read poetry really since college. And I just considered it a nice gift. I've actually been going through it this year, and it's really a great gift. Her dad's name is Ken Gibble, and he has written a poetry of the soul. I just read yesterday the poem called A Gift. And listen, poetry may not be your thing, but this is so encouraging. It's really a hope-filled book of poems that he's written throughout his career. And I just wanted to really give a shout out to him and to Katie and Jason. Okay, so I'm going to read something here to start off my message today. This is something that really came about late one night last week and early the next morning when I woke up. So I'm just going to stick to my journal here, and then I'll finish our time together with my message, the thoughts that I've got from Jesus Passion Week leading to the cross and to Easter weekend. Okay, so I went to bed one night last week so deeply concerned about the loud voices our culture has become. So many loud opinions around our country, calling others out, canceling public figures and neighbors and anyone with mistakes in their past. And I went to bed concerned about how busy everyone still seems. Busy itself is a good thing. We were designed to work hard and be busy. We know that from Scripture. But too busy for others and those in need is a toxic version. Now, I also went to bed that night last week incredibly grateful for a man in our church who a couple hours earlier had called me to ask if he and his wife could anonymously help anyone in our community that I could think of who was in need and just needed some encouragement. And so I went to bed with all of this on my mind, and I woke the next morning, and this is what came out on paper. Easter. This time last year, we were learning about and talking about flattening the curve. Exactly a year ago, what we were told is that we must radically alter our lives in order to protect one another, to protect those to protect those who are older, protect the vulnerable, and protect our communities and our neighbors. Now, we did a lot of that, and I saw so many Americans committed to those things, of course, but what I also have witnessed is so many people, maybe most, seeming so loud this year and ironically busy or preoccupied with getting through COVID and all the many national events so we can get back to normal. I caught myself more than a couple times saying, I hope we can get back to normal soon. Though, as I said that, the handful of times I know I said it, it really countered or defied something that God had already made clear in my consciousness about what was really happening this past year. So this past year, the collective narrative has seemed to say something to the effect of, I'll get back to God, or I'll really prioritize Him again, or maybe for the first time in my life, when my country and my life are mostly back to normal. And the result has been people trying to work and parent and live and plan for the future, potentially neglecting or ignoring the inner change God intends during a disruption like a pandemic or during any disruption. So many have been and are trying to get back control, to get control back or to get back to normal, blind, in my opinion, blind to the reality that God allowed all of this past year so as to move us away from normal. While we collectively blamed Republicans or Democrats or scientists or other countries or black protests or white men or an election or teachers' unions, God never actually loses control during crisis. He has been masterfully at work using the broken things of our world to take away from us a sense of control, to take away from us normal. Okay, so I continued to write early that morning last week. All the physical distancing, so much time away from the office and time at home, all the race tensions and political division and COVID opinions, it's all intended to humble us and move us closer to each other. And for us to express our need for God's love to recalibrate and redirect us. Yes, the physical distancing should have moved us closer to one another. Emotionally and spiritually, being concerned about one another and our neighbors and strangers and those different from us, especially those different from us. And it was all intended to align us more with God's heart and His agenda for what matters to Him. This is always God's agenda and what matters to Him. Other people. Connecting with and encouraging and loving others is always God's agenda. One significant change I know we needed before COVID was to slow down and have time for others, meals with neighbors, and to be available to meet emotional and practical needs of others. So God has been working this past year to make us interruptible. And interrupt us He did. My concern is that we're already reverting back to having very little time for others already before the pandemic is actually completely over. Instead, what so many Americans worked very hard Instead, what so many Americans worked very hard at during the pandemic was defense of our own passions, positions, our own opinions, our own freedoms and privileges, and what we ourselves need. And what I saw Americans practice with more finely tuned precision was tuning into news sources, and yes, often tuning into churches that affirm what we want to hear and what we already believe. Not only should the events and chaos of the last year show us that God can interrupt humans to get our attention, but He can and will humble us to get our attention, to reset our attention on what truly matters, what His passion is. So think about it. Now, this is going to sound like a political statement, and it really isn't. That's not the intent of what I'm writing here. Just please hear the heart behind this statement. Think about it. Almost a year ago, the two primary voices who spoke and shaped our impression and posture of the virus by way of daily and lengthy press conferences were President Trump and Governor Cuomo. Just a year ago, they were the prominent voices we were hearing every single day. And in 1 year, their voices are quiet. While we blame sides and defend sides, God continues to interrupt and humble humans, all to level set our focus on what matters to Him, the plight and needs of one another. The plight and needs of our neighbors, our strangers around us, which last Easter is exactly what I believe God began the work of doing. Similar to the first original Easter, God was at work in the pain and unexpected and disruption and the loss to lead us to life, really to lead us to true resurrection. He's always at work trying to move us toward life and toward resurrection. This Easter, what we should be doing is prioritizing our shock and realization that in the enlightened, technologically advanced 21st century, the people of the United States of America do not have our act together as much as we'd like to believe. Hasn't that become crystal clear to us this past year? I'm convinced that that's been God's intent, at least here in the U.S., during a pandemic in which God never lost control, not once, not for a single second. Humility is what's missing when we feel in control or when we prioritize just getting back to normal. The spiritual intent of this past year was to humble us away from normal. The United States has proven over and over now how much we have to learn and how in need we truly are. And God help us, we've got to stop blaming the Republicans or the Democrats or BLM or white men. And again, I could repeat the whole list. Is change needed? Of course change is needed, always. In a broken world, change will always be needed. But as long as we continue to loudly and quickly cancel and denounce and blame, we're missing the entire point. We cannot let COVID end. We cannot let COVID end believing it's all been to get control back and to defend what we are sure we already knew or what we already know. To spend our weeks absorbing news agencies and church voices that simply affirm our political opinions. We've chosen a tragic posture that leaves us with no added humility or growth or challenging confrontation with the person of Jesus. Following 2020, in the year of COVID and division, in my opinion, those who emerge as healthy and growing and offering actual substantive hope to a broken world are people who realize three things. First, that God makes us healthy when we passionately seek His heart and His wisdom. Number two, when we realize that God's plan for our lives is always primarily for others and for outsiders. And number three, when we realize that Jesus is always attempting to move humans toward a future of renewal rather than canceling them for their pasts. May the end of COVID rattle us if we haven't quieted our loud, blaming, defensive voices, if we haven't become interruptible, and if we haven't recognized that God can and ultimately will humble us so that we see with open eyes and with soft hearts that what always matters to Him is love for our neighbor. Okay, so first to my friend, the couple at our church who reached out one night last week and just said, "Hey, Brad, could we anonymously help someone financially, somebody who's needing encouragement and needing support?" I just want to thank you, and to so many of you that make up the Dulles Church community who are looking for ways in this broken, upside down world, just always looking for ways to extend the contagious love of Jesus to others. What you've received, the undeserved, amazing love of our God, in turn offering it to others. It's so inspiring, and it was inspiring last week on a night when I went to bed really discouraged. Just the louder and louder critical voices that seem to be growing in this country. Okay, so this is what I want to do for the rest of our time here today. I want to focus us on what we should be doing, and that is ensuring, before things get back to normal, that you and I never return to normal ever again. We should be lowering ourselves to learn the way of Jesus and walk humbly for the benefit of others, period. This is what Jesus was teaching us precisely hours before his death, hours before the crucifixion. Jesus was intently focused on getting into our hearts and spirits and our minds that lowering ourselves for the sake of others is the way of his kingdom. And it really only works when it's done through the experience of his resurrection. When we have experienced life that we can't produce for ourselves, when we are being renewed and remade in areas of our lives that we just cannot renew on our own, but we're being offered that reshaping and remaking because of his power over death. And now we have our own life over our own brokenness. When that is offered, when that spirit, when that experience is offered to others, it changes the world. And that's what we're ultimately craving. So today is Palm Sunday, and I want to look in the rest of our time here, just a handful of minutes here today, at some of the narratives that came from the gospel writers from the Passion Week. The Passion Week was the 7 days where Jesus journeyed from the town of Bethany into the city of Jerusalem and ultimately to the cross. And today marks Palm Sunday, the day Jesus rode through Bethany on his way to Jerusalem. And I want to start with Matthew. We're going to look at three accounts here, three of the four gospel accounts. At the beginning of Matthew's account of the Passion Week, and I'm going to this is a short little blurb that's just going to be on the screen. It's so powerful, where Jesus is telling his disciples, if you give up your time and you make sacrifices in your own resources and you live your lives for the sake of others, you will be part of my renewal movement. And at the beginning of that whole dialogue, and I'm just going to make this simple on the screen here, in Matthew 19:28, Jesus says, truly, I tell you, he's speaking to the disciples, at the renewal of all things. And I just want to pause right there because that's a powerful statement. Jesus is talking about the day that he comes back and returns after we, his church, have been about the business of renewal and remaking and giving life into dead, broken places, into people's experiences where they thought it was too late or they carry such guilt or shame, when we are offering our own experience of the renewal that he has given us on this side of the resurrection. When we are a part of that to broken people and people who disagree with us, people who vote differently from us, people who pray differently from us, when we are about simply offering life and renewal and hope and good into brokenness, Jesus is talking about his return. He will come. We will be ushering him back, inviting him to come complete the renewal process. And he's saying that all things that walk in light of the resurrection will be renewed. All things lost, all things broken. I mean, it's powerful that Jesus says at the renewal of all things. Okay, this is the beginning of Matthew's account of the Passion Week. Now, I'm going to leave that alone as a setup to what John tells us. A lot of us are familiar with John 13. It's one of the most important scriptures that I think we should review several times a year, at least. This isn't even really the main point I'm going to make today. The main point is going to come out of Luke. But stay with me. If you think you're familiar with this text, that's okay. Stay with me through these verses here in John 13. Now, this is John's account during the Passion Week. This is actually at the Last Supper. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go back to the Father. Having loved his own who were with him in the world, meaning his disciples and his followers, he loved them to the end. It's such a powerful statement. What does that mean? He loved them to the end. Well, he's about to go to the cross for all the brokenness and ugly of humanity. And he's about to do that for them, of course, them included. But he's now going to demonstrate or give a foretaste, a foreshadow of the cross by lowering himself as the servant who washes their feet. So he's loving them to the end, like ultimately, like as far as anyone could love anyone, Jesus is doing it now. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power. Think about that statement. Jesus now has all power from the Father. All power has been put under Jesus' control and authority. I mean, imagine if a Marvel character, or I mean, that's almost making this just silly in a way to refer to something like that. But imagine something in our everyday world or in fiction world or a character in a movie having all power that there is. What would somebody with all power do? What is the most powerful person in the room, in your boardroom? What do they do with that power? Or the most powerful person in your neighborhood or in your life? Jesus has all power, and he realizes that. So in verse 4, what does he do with that power? He got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, which was the rabbinical clothing of authority, which marked Jesus publicly as a teacher, as a rabbi. He takes off that sign of authority, and he wraps a servant's towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into the basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, doing what the servant normally does at the doorway before a meal. As people approach as guests someone's home, he visibly becomes the servant and actually begins serving them by washing their feet. Simon Peter says to Jesus, "Lord, what are you doing? Are you going to wash my feet? You can't. You're my teacher. You're my Lord. You're my God. I recognize you as the Messiah. You can't bend down and be my servant." Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand. After the resurrection, after what's about to happen on the cross in my resurrection, you'll understand that the way of my kingdom, the way of walking in the power of God and seeing the activity of God in your life, in your home, actually experiencing the reality of God and being a part of it in this broken world. Your access point to that, Peter, is by bending down and serving people who don't deserve it, and people who've been ugly, and people who think differently than you. When you bend down and serve them, instead of fighting back and protesting over and over. Are protests needed? Of course they are. Protests have brought about needed change, of course. But if all you do is in human power protest and blame and push back, the kingdom of God's reality is never going to be experienced in the brokenness of people's lives. This is what Jesus is trying to get Peter to understand just before the moment and experience of Easter, just before his arrest. "Unless I wash you, you will have no part with me, Peter. You actually, if you don't allow me to do ultimately what I'm going to do hours from now, wash you by going to the cross with all of your ugly, with everything that contaminates humanity, with everything that is a virus to the human soul. If you don't allow me, Peter, to take your virus of self-centered thinking and selfish defaults to the cross and allow it to be dealt with there, and if you don't allow my resurrection over that kind of death, over that selfishness, over that brokenness, if you don't allow me in the hours to come and tomorrow to die for you and all the ugly and self-choosing, and the ultimate word in Scripture is sin, the lack of God's rightness. If you don't allow me, Peter, to do this for you tomorrow, where it really counts, you actually won't be a part of my movement of renewal, which will precede, through the people of my church, my followers, will precede my ultimate return, where I complete the renewal of all things. You won't be a part of that, Peter. You'll just be trusting in governments and human power and human leaders and your own strength that really isn't going to get you very far. It's not going to move the needle much. What's going to move the needle in this world is if you allow me to become your servant in all of my authority and everything I could do with all authority placed under me. I'm using that authority to bend down and serve humanity. And he tells Peter, "I know you don't get it now, Peter, but you will." So when he finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place at the table. This is at the Lord's Supper, of course. "Do you understand what I've done for you?" he asks his disciples. "You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right. That's who I am. Now that I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, have become your servant, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you." Verse 17, "Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." Blessed sounds kind of like a happy thought, like you'll have. Blessed here means you will be filled with the favor of God, the power of God, the activity of God. You will be blessed with everything that I have in my ability, in my kingdom, will be your experience. John's account, John seems to be focusing here at the Last Supper. There's a lot going on here. He seems to be emphasizing for us, for the readers, that Peter is pushing back on the idea that Jesus and his kingdom bring about renewal in broken places through serving others. Peter's just having trouble comprehending this. Now, all of this is to set up what we read in Luke's account of the Passion Week, Luke's account at the Last Supper. So This isn't a different story. This is the same story, but now through the eyes of Luke. And this is really something I want to focus. John's account of the Last Supper gets a lot of attention. It's taught widely around the world. Much less attention is placed on something Luke tells us that I think is a travesty. So what's happened here is they're in the upper room. They're at the Last Supper. I'm going to just give you a little bit of the context here. Luke 22:7. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. This is the Passover meal. Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." So this is the same setting. This is now Luke telling us of this whole experience in the upper room. Jesus washes their feet. I'm going to move on past that. When the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table. He says, "I've eagerly desired to eat this meal with you." And then he takes the cup and he talks about his blood and this new covenant, this new plan that is unfolding. And he gives them the cup and then he breaks the bread, of course. And he's leading them in what we call communion. Then Judas betrays Jesus. And this is that unbelievable scene where Jesus says, "One of you is going to betray me," and they start debating who is it? Is it you? Is it him? And then Judas reveals himself and betrays Jesus. And of course, Judas just not very long after hangs himself because he's tormented by what he's done. Okay, that is the villainous moment of this scene, or so we think, is Judas betraying Jesus at the Last Supper. What comes next is remarkable. Okay, so everything we've talked about so far here today is a setup. It's a setup to what we're about to read. So the Last Supper has happened. Jesus has washed the feet of the disciples. He has challenged them through Peter, by way of Peter, that this is my kingdom. My authority looks like this. I have chosen to offer people life by serving them on the cross. And I'm going to bring people back to life in all the dead places of their past and their life through my resurrection. And it's going to be ultimately that resurrection that renews this world the way we all crave. That's why everybody's protesting and angry and blaming, and the whole movement to correct people's past, and people need to be canceled because they've done this. At the root of that is a better world. That's really what everybody's saying is, I want our world to be better. I want equality. I want not just more tolerance, but I want to see what we all crave, healing and hope and love in this world. That's what our planet is crying out in loud voices about right now. What Jesus is telling us is broken humanity can never fix themselves. It's going to take power over death. My full authority and the power that God has fully given me will be realized when I actually have and demonstrate power over all that breaks humanity, which is ultimately death and all kinds of death, relational death and death of dreams and the death of guilt and shame that haunts people. Okay, all of this has been happening in the last room, and Jesus is trying to prepare them for what the cross is going to be, and then this happens. It's just unthinkable. A dispute also arose among the disciples as to which of them was considered to be greatest. It's mind-boggling to me. I mean, it just makes me like, wait, what? This is after the foot washing. This is after Jesus breaking the bread and sharing the wine. This is after the long discourse of what the kingdom of God is really about. And you can be part of it, or you can miss out on it, Peter. If you're going to be a part of me in my movement in this world of remaking things, you have to let me wash you. You have to let me become your servant. After all of that, they still, and this is what I went to bed last night, last week, that night last week, struggling with so much. It's like we're trying everything we can here in America, and I would say around the world. We're trying in all of our human effort to push back and to speak up and to call out and to cancel and to try to right the wrongs of people's pasts. And we still can't do it. We don't have the ability in and of ourselves to do it. And yet here is a scene where the disciples, in the context they're in, are disputing. They're arguing amongst each other which one of us is greatest. The disciples still thought at this point, they still haven't understood that Jesus isn't creating a government, a political government, where he's going to overthrow the Roman Empire. They believe Jesus is going to construct a political government, a government kingdom, so to speak, in the capital, and that he will appoint secretaries and offices of influence, leadership offices, where people have authority and are elevated in power and title. That's what the disciples think he's going to do. And so they're debating which one of them is going to have the highest seat in Jesus' new government. The disciples are showing us here. This is profound. This is the point of everything today. The disciples are showing us at the Last Supper, following communion, following the washing of their feet, that self-serving ambition can find its way even into the most sacred places, into the deepest recesses of your heart and my heart, in the hearts of well-meaning people all around us. Self-seeking ambition. How can I exert my voice or my power to bring about change or to be over people? In their case, they want to find out who's going to be the most powerful in leadership. Jesus interrupted their argument. I mean, if you don't think God interrupts us, it is crystal clear to me that God interrupted our world, our planet, this past year. And I think he's particularly been focused on interrupting Americans in what we think is politically right and what we think the solution is, or who we think is wrong, or who should be in power or shouldn't be in power. We are wasting our times. We are defaulting, just like the disciples are defaulting, back to the right person in power. The right person in power is going to solve, finally, all the problems. And usually we think that it's us, or it's our country, it's America, or it's my way of political thinking. Jesus interrupts us, and he will continue to do it. If we don't get this right, he will continue to interrupt humanity. Jesus interrupted their argument, saying, "The kings of men in authority of this world rule oppressively over their subjects, claiming that they do it for the good of the people. They are obsessed with how others see them." I don't think you have to go outside of the United States of America to see that obsession. Obsessed with power and obsessed with how other people see us, maybe in social media or in our high school. The disciples are showing us that the self-serving ambition can find its way even in the most sacred places. Jesus goes on to say in verse 26, "But you are not to be like that. You will lead by a different model." Jesus isn't saying, oh, you're going to be lowly servants and you're going to be meek and you'll never be noticed and you'll just live kind of a quiet existence. That's not what Jesus means by lowering ourselves to serve strangers and to serve those different from us and to serve and love our neighbor. Jesus isn't talking about just crawling away in quiet obscurity. Jesus is talking about us leading. But you are not to be like that. You will lead by a different model. The greatest one among you will live as one called to serve others without honor, without receiving honor. For who is greater? This is the rhetorical question here that I just think is so profound. Who is greater, Jesus asked, the one who is at the table or the one who stands by the table serving? Of course, the answer in society is, well, the one who is sitting at the table. He's the guest. She's the guest. The servant is the lower person, the lower, less important person who does the serving. Jesus says, is not the most important one the one who sits at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. He literally got up from the table just moments earlier and served them and became the servant. You are those who have stood with me in my trials, and I confer on you a kingdom just as my Father has conferred one on me. And this is a kingdom of renewal. It's a kingdom of remaking and rebuilding, recreating out of all that is lost and destructive and lonely and hurting and broken. And if you've heard me say this kind of thing before, you will hear me say it 1,000 times more. This is what we're all about. And so I want to invite you today on Palm Sunday into this movement with us. Our directional team and I have been working on really our vision. It really hasn't changed. Our purpose and who we are, it's really never changed, but we have been working on the wording. We've used Patrick Lencioni's amazing leadership book, The Advantage, to guide us in this process. And so I'm going to just this is a reveal here, really. We've been working carefully on the specific wording of what Dulles Church is all about so that we can remind one another, we can tell others who are considering joining us in this movement. And so here it is. We're going to put it on the screen here. Our purpose here at Dulles is to help our community. And by community, we don't mean just people who live near one another in neighborhoods or people right here in the Dulles area. Our community is anyone who shares our common unity. Anyone who has the common unity of what Jesus has done for broken planet Earth and for all of us, and the common unity that we want to be part of his renewal movement. So wherever you watch from, on the West Coast or even in other countries, wherever you join us from, if you have this in common with us, if your heart's cry is come unity through the renewal of Jesus, then you're a part of the Dulles family, and that's what we mean by community. The purpose of Dulles Church is to help our community embody the love of Jesus. And there's a lot to that wording, that we would embody the love of Jesus for the good of our neighbor and the renewal of our world. That is what Dulles Church is all about. And so today, on this Palm Sunday, I am challenging you, wherever you're watching from, whatever you're doing, I'm asking you to stop, and will you entertain this challenge? Will you join us in this movement? Will you actually no longer see yourself attending church and hearing encouraging words once a week? Will you consider the idea of becoming part of the movement of Jesus, renewing what is lost and broken in this world, loving strangers, giving up time, making sacrifice for people in need, for those who need our encouragement? Will you join us, not in being a perfect church? I mean, as long as broken people who are being remade and renewed, which we are, as long as we're on this side of Jesus' return to ultimately completely renew everything that's broken, we're never going to be perfect in and of ourselves and our own leadership. That's not our goal. Our goal is to become more and more like Jesus and to encourage one another and challenge one another to be that. Will you become part of this movement with us? There are a few things here as I wrap up our time together here today. First of all, right now, I want you to just stop and consider this. If you're listening in your car, if you're watching from your living room, how can you step into renewal right now, this week, by offering renewal to someone who's hurting, someone who's confused, someone who's broken, maybe to someone who needs a friend who sees their future differently than they do, who sees their future with hope, a person who just needs your story or my story of the renewal that we're experiencing from the love of God and specifically from the resurrection power of Jesus. What will you do this week to offer someone renewal? Maybe a meal. You don't have to be eloquent. You don't have to be an expert in the Bible to take someone a meal or to have a meal delivered to their house, someone who needs to be encouraged. You don't have to be an expert in the Bible to join one of our teams at Dulles to ensure that we live out our purpose here at Dulles Church. We have a lot of needs in this place, and we really need people to engage, especially as we're coming out of the pandemic. Who are you going to invite to watch Easter with you or to join us at Light Ridge High School? And listen, that can be awkward or uncomfortable talking about church, and I know talking about faith. Listen, it's just something like, hey, I know we don't talk much about faith, and that can be an awkward subject, but man, I am learning such a new worldview at my church, and I'd love it if you came with me on Easter. We can grab a cup of coffee and sit and listen together. It's something along those lines in just offering a friend or a coworker to come consider a new way of looking at Easter and looking at our world. And here's the last challenge of our time together today. On Tuesday, April 13th, in my backyard, I'm inviting anyone who wants to engage further at Dulles Church. If you live somewhere out of the Dulles area and you want to join us by Zoom, you'll be able to do that. I need you to let us know that you would like to join our 1-hour vision night. I'm calling it Vision Night. It's going to be in my backyard. And I'm just going to really kind of in the first few minutes set up what we're talking about here. I'm going to remind everybody what we're about at Dulles Church, what our purpose really is, what drives us. And I'm going to invite people to join us in various ways, preparing meals for folks, reaching out to make sure somebody that's on our prayer list is really being thought of and being prayed for specifically. Joining our production team, our video projection team, our coffee team. We have a lot of roles where we need people to support what Dulles Church is all about so that we continue to expand the love of Jesus into this world. We're going into Easter week. I love you guys. I can't wait for what I get to share next weekend on Easter Sunday. Who are you going to invite to join you and to watch with you or to join us at Light Ridge? And will you join us in my backyard, either virtually or in person, on Tuesday, April 13th from 7 to 8 p.m. We need you to email Christina Bartz, christinab@dulleschurch.org. I'm asking everyone who's going to join us to email us. Take the time to actually email and say, hey, I'm going to be there. Or Brad, what's your address? I'd love for you to join us in that amazing conversation that's going to be about how we as a church are collectively going to be a part of the remaking of what's broken on this planet. God, I pray that these have been your words today, far beyond anything that I could speak. And I pray that we would respond. In the busyness of our lives, I pray that we would stop and we would allow you to interrupt us enough that we would become part of this movement. We would say, yes, I want to have a role. I want to be part of your kingdom. Yes, Jesus, I'm going to let your death and resurrection be the renewing washing that my life is needed. And yes, I'm going to lean into the movement of your church. If you prayed that prayer, will you just send me a note and let me know? Love you guys. Have a great week.